Michael Eric Dyson opens his book, The Black Presidency, Barack Obama and the Politics of Race, with these words: Barack Obama's Black Presidency has shocked the symbol system of American politics and made the adjective in representative democracy mean something quite different than in the past. Obama provoked great hope and fear about what a Black presidency might mean to our democracy. Obama's presidency unfolded against the national traumas of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, and Walter Scott. The nation's first African-American president was careful to give few major race speeches, yet he faced criticism from all sides, including from African Americans. How, Professor Dyson asks, has Obama's race affected his presidency and the nation's identity? Michael Eric Dyson is professor of sociology at Georgetown University and one of the nation's most renowned public intellectuals. He is a New York Times op-ed contributor, an MSNBC political analyst, a contributing editor for The New Republic, and the best-selling author of 17 books. He won the American Book Award for his book on Hurricane Katrina, but his topics include Martin Luther King Jr., Tupac Shakur, Marvin Gaye, and the Black middle class. He frequently appears on radio and television, but he is equally at home speaking in prisons, political conventions and union halls, the classroom, and not least, the pulpit. Essence magazine named him one of the 40 most inspiring African Americans, and Ebony magazine named him one of the 100 most influential Black Americans. He answered back to his former mentor, Cornel West, has flown on Air Force One, and has made common cause with those who came before him and those, like you students, who will follow him. His new book has been described as an illuminating tour of the nation's first Black presidency, from his first speech at a national convention to the singing of Amazing Grace. Please join me in welcoming Professor Michael Eric Dyson.
You all right?
Yeah, that was terrible. So
That's all right. No, that works.
Thank you. I want to thank Dean Gretchen Gerzina. I'm sorry she's allergic to me. What a wonderful and dear friend of so many years, a brilliant scholar, a raconteur, a woman who traffics effortlessly in ideas, and a person who is a tremendous leader in higher education. So it is a great honor to be here under her invitation and our friendship over the last quarter of a century. And I must say, as I age, she continues to remain ageless. And it's a great honor to be here today at UMass Amherst with its grand traditions of literacy from every stream and every tributary of the American imagination, but especially, of course, when we think about the extraordinary presence of luminaries in this institutional framework, from James Baldwin to some of the great scholars who have taught here and who continue to teach here, and whose presence around the signal and symbolic presence of Du Bois continues to radiate outward tremendous intelligence, tremendous illumination, tremendous enlightenment, and tremendous scholarship. So it's an honor to be here. I read John Bracey as a student in college. And his brilliant insight and essays on Afro-American studies and the means by which it was constituted institutionally and with the extraordinary disciplinary boundaries that were certainly being put in place. So I've got to shout him out in particular for his brilliance and for carrying the torch forward, and so many others like Professor Telwell. And when I think about the people I'm reading even today, Professor Lordy, Professor Ford, books that inspire and continue to instruct brilliant young scholars like Professor Celaya, who are here. This is a rich and resonant tradition, and I am proud to be here today to speak to you and to engage in some critical dialogue. My very dear friend Sut Jolly, who is a friend of at least a quarter century, is here as well, and I'm grateful for his presence. As Dean Gerzina indicated, I want to reflect on the Black Presidency, Barack Obama, and the politics of race in America. Barack Obama, of course, is an extraordinary figure, arguably the most famous black person in the world, the most powerful black person in history, and certainly the most powerful man in the world today, the occupant of that office according to the imperial arrogance that we are wont to, suggests that the President of the United States of America, by virtue of the occupation of that office, is the most powerful person in not only the nation, but in the world. The fact that we say that a black man is the most powerful figure in the world is not to be taken for granted, despite the fact that the tutelage we have received from our elders and our scholars remind us of the extraordinary expansiveness of the imagination and exploits of black people throughout global history that have been willfully suppressed or sometimes arbitrarily marginalized in the retelling of global history. And yet Obama stands out even among those global figures in world history for having ascended to the heights of American political authority and now to become the first African American to be the President of the United States of America. Literally, Obama had an idea that no other black human being has been able to carry forward to its fruition. The notion that one would head the most powerful empire in the history of the world. And yet that has come at great cost. Some see the cost as an ideological one, that the subversion of the moral arc and the wonderful trajectory of the black liberation struggle has been lessened. Some would say it's been undercut, some would say subverted, some would say marginalized and rendered peripheral, some would say it's been obscured. But the impetus for liberation and emancipation has somehow been checked, held at bay, by a figure whose very body articulates the genius and triumph of those ideas and those aspirations, and yet by its very definition cannot exist exclusively or even primarily within the sphere of political authenticity and racial connection that his own ascent suggests. In other words, Obama as a black man is a bit of a paradox. On the one hand, he is the beautiful summation of a centuries-long quest for the formal recognition and the political respect of the dignity of black humanity. On the other hand, he is the representation of an extraordinary journey that black people have engaged in from the very beginning of their sojourn in the New World, having been extricated from their native soil and their haunts in Africa and brought from that continent here to America in 1619 and forced against their will and coercively conscripted into the labor of American culture to further the telos of agrarian capital, to build this nation in ways that have been barely recognized. And of course, your own Professor Sinha has brilliantly written about this in 2 books. And so he is the product of that extraordinary experiment, but even there we have to add asterisks and qualifications. Some have made it certainly sure that Obama is not an indigenous African American by virtue of the fact that his mother is a white woman hailing from Kansas and his daddy from Kenya. And so he didn't have, the argument goes, the typical experience of African Americans who are here, who are the progeny of progenitors who themselves were enslaved, chained, and entombed in the mendacious heart of the American democratic experiment that rested upon the denial of the legitimacy and humanity of black bodies and intelligence. And so Obama is a paradox in that sense, that the man who represents so much of the brilliance and beauty and the power and the eloquence of black identity has himself managed to both embrace to some and alienate to others a central and significant meaning of blackness in the modern world, especially in America, where the debt paid to an American culture that refused to acknowledge us, the ongoing negotiations with and transactions within this American sphere have been, in one sense, colored, shaded, and qualified by the unique circumstances of his birth. If we were going to central casting in a Hollywood film, his background might appear to be too idealistic, not even real. White woman as his mother, black man, African in particular, as his father, growing up not on the south side of Chicago, the west side of Detroit, not even in Roxbury and Boston, but in Hawaii. Spending some time in Indonesia. Now, given our appreciation for the global dimensions of blackness, the Black Atlantic, the iterations of the diasporic intelligence of black people spread out, the tentacles of blackness globally sprung. So in that sense, perhaps there is something to be celebrated in Obama's identity, but it is queasy-making for many. It is uncomfortable for others because he can't be quite pinned down. We don't know the specificity and particularity of his black identity. The pedigree of his blackness is at stake and especially vulnerable to those who have put forth more vigorous conceptions of black identity. From the black fundamentalists, racial fundamentalists who believe in a very narrow and literal conception of blackness, to those who are far more eclectic in their ruminations upon the character and the destiny of blackness in our American state and on our American shores. So Obama, as the black president, already evokes contested ideas about what it means to be black. Those are not insignificant because the very struggle over what it means to be black is at the heart of the American empire, not simply at the heart of African American culture. It is at the very heart of what it means to be American. Orlando Patterson argued in his book Freedom that we can't even conceive of freedom in the West, in America in particular, without the concurrent backdrop and the parallel and the situation that slavery brings to the modern West. Not simply empirically verifying that argument by looking at the ways in which black bodies became the predicate for the expansion of American labor. Black bodies were literally the technology of the fantasies of white America. The white imagination found its most powerful extension and realization in the very limbs and the anatomy and the bodies of black people. Black people are technology. So the cyborgian projection of the future is the black past. And in that sense, those bodies became literally the population of this American soil, the population of American democracy. Without that struggle, that energy, that labor, and that intelligence, America as it exists now would not. And so, when we think about the rich resources of our diasporic understanding of blackness, when we think about the Black Atlantic, the ways in which blackness must be at the very least triangulated between what happens here and what happens, say, in British culture, or what happens in Bahia or Salvador de Cuba, what happens when blackness is seen in a more global perspective, what happens when blackness is seen against the global backdrop against which it expands and in which it interacts with the native and indigenous cultures and establishes its powerful presence in ways that we continue to grapple with. That sense of blackness is not insignificant, even with contemporary struggles for self-definition. The Black Lives Matter movement reminds us of what Professor Kimberly Crenshaw has brilliantly named the intersectionality of our analysis and of our identities. The relentless intermingling and interlocking both of rich resources that nurture a sense of identity and the forces of oppression that undermine the stability of our own particular nation or our own particular club, group, tribe, or race. And so Obama evokes this just by stepping up in the spot, just by representing literally the representative of the American democratic way, literally the representative of the American people as the titular head of American democracy, literally representing by the very skin he inhabits, literally representing because he is representative of what he chooses, not even consciously necessarily to embrace, the black identity, the black imagination that is forever thrust upon him willy-nilly, even without his permission. All that borne by the thin frame but the colossal shoulders of this incredibly important and resonant and complicated and contradictory historical figure. That a black man as president still strikes some as just a bit odd, off kilter, maybe not even real. Even as he prepares to take leave of that office, some still can't believe and pinch themselves to really remind themselves that this actually occurred. It wasn't a blip on the screen. It wasn't something that was a projected fantasy. I know that when Obama was first elected, many black people had to wake up and say, were we just dreaming? Is this black figure really the president of the United States of America with its credos of e pluribus unum, out of many one, many other Latin phrases that regulate and govern our conception collectively of what it means to be an American? That a black face now is at the head of the American empire is problematic to many because now what it does is kiss and bless the extension of American empire. It begins to legitimate and give real significance to projects that were heretofore criticized by black freedom struggles. Part of the virtue of being part of that black freedom struggle was to articulate an international experience that sometimes criticized the parochial character of American democratic insight. In other words, one of the virtues of being part of the African American tribe and tradition is that people like Robeson and people like King and people like Malcolm X and people like Ida B. Wells Barnett, people who were struggling in the midst and the cauldron, the seething cauldron of American empire and white supremacy, they brought critique upon this American shore by borrowing from and engaging with international figures who were able to criticize what was going on here. And it rendered America a bit more hypocritical in its policing of the world, acting as a moral cop before the world when its own hind parts were exposed, when its own vicious practices made it vulnerable to rebuff and to be held up as an example of the opposite of what it forced on the rest of the world. And so Barack Obama represents that as well. Being president of the United States of America is interesting as well because under this particular figure has emerged a recrudescent racism, a revived, renewed racism, a renaissance of racial animus that shakes the foundations of our collective enterprise as a nation. While we celebrate the first black man to live in public housing in such glorious fashion. Now, don't y'all apply for 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue on Section 80. It ain't gonna happen, dog. This black man and his brilliant, beautiful wife and his brilliant, beautiful children occupying public housing, putting to death the belief that black people who live in such housing come to no good. What good can come out of Nazareth? What good can come out of public housing? Public housing, a lot of good in that sense. And yet occupying that terrain and existing in that sphere, under Obama, as the beauty and power and brilliance and contradiction and complication of blackness are focused on his thin limbs, there has been a renaissance of racial animus, a recrudescence of racism, white supremacy's rearticulation, having a new birthday in the midst of black horror and terror. Barack Obama presides over a nation that has seen the revival of a skepticism about black humanity, the revival of a denial of the legitimacy of black life. Black Lives Matter is in direct response to the repudiation of the humanity of black people and the skepticism about black intelligence that has been part and parcel of the American scene from the beginning. Thomas Jefferson, I will remind you, wrote in Notes on Virginia about his skepticism about black intelligence and even black artistic ability. At least Negroes used to be able to get the love for the music. But Jefferson came along before Aretha Franklin, so we'll have to forgive him. Jefferson doubted the ability of Negroes, our harmonic structures versus European harmonic structures, the melodies he thought were inferior. Really? We got them beats though. The rhythms, the tonalities of African-centered identities washing over America, and yet the serpentine, swirling beats have now seduced America into something different. Jazz music becomes the sine qua non of American genius. It becomes the particular expression of the American ideal. No music more powerful right now on the globe than hip-hop. And so Thomas Jefferson questioned not only our artistic milieu and our artistic abilities, he even questioned our intellectual capacities and our cerebral acuity. But at night, he grabbed some Luther Vandross tapes. I don't know if y'all remember who Luther Vandross is in this young generation. Y'all stuck on, I don't know, Fetty Wap. 1738. That's about the year we're talking about, for sure, but he's referring to another brand of liquor. But what's interesting is that Thomas Jefferson's logic denied the legitimacy of the thing his loins could not resist. And so Sally Hemings was in his purview. And what's interesting, of course, is that people looked askance at that conception, that very idea, that very notion that he might have laid with her. Really? Do you not know that's what was going on the regular? Why do you think Negroes as yellow as I exist? Because people were hating on Africa, but they loved that chocolate. And so the repulsion to blackness and the attraction to it at the same time, the rhythmic intensity, the cyclical nature of that hating and loving of blackness, of the push-pull of the African ideal in America, and ideal as well. And so, in this nation, we have seen the denial of the humanity and legitimacy, the intelligence, the beauty, the power, the irresistibility of blackness. The skepticism about our black humanity has gone on from the get-go. And so, Thomas Jefferson, among many others, David Hume in the broader philosophical world of ideas, Immanuel Kant, many of the greatest thinkers in the world in the West, did not believe in the humanity of black people. So when we hear Black Lives Matter, it may be a new movement, but they are echoing an ancient plea to recognize us for who we are, and to recognize us in the depth and breadth and height of our humanity, the incredible fertility of our imaginations, and the irresistible beauty of our moral bearing. Black Lives Matter exists under a black president because that black president has been hesitant to address the issue of race. In fact, has himself re-articulated some of the most vicious stereotypes of blackness to be had. As he goes to Morehouse College, the most esteemed black male institution of higher learning in America, and warns those young men that they will not receive anything for which they have not worked, as if they have not already worked to graduate. He tells them this upon their day of graduation. You will not get what you have not earned, and yet the only person who didn't earn a degree that day, Mr. President, was you, since you received an honorary degree. He told them that they cannot cry racism in a global economy where jobs are being competed for. The cry of racism will be muted by either the lack of efficiency or contribution through labor in a global marketplace that was highly technical. When he went to Barnard College, predominantly white and female, he did not similarly say to the women, stop kvetching about sexism. Why is it then that he goes to the black institution to publicly perform a kind of excoriation of blackness, a scolding and lecturing, not in the best sense of that word, of black people? Because he's not simply or primarily speaking to black people, he's using them as an instrument and a vehicle to reinforce a kind of simpatico with a dominant empire of which he is now the supreme representative. And part of what it means to be an American truly is to deny the legitimacy of people of color, in this case especially black people. Toni Morrison said, on the backs of blacks America was built. And one of the things that many of our immigrant brothers and sisters learn when they come to America is who is at the bottom of the totem pole and who to hate first. And not just in terms of ethnicity, but in color and in shade. Why is it that the darker people are always at the bottom? Travel over to Brazil, which flaunts its lack of racist history. Yeah, but all the dark people doing the menial jobs and the lighter people got the better jobs. Throughout this world, light versus dark is real. Go to Cuba. Go to many places in America. Light versus dark is real. Black people are wont to speak about white privilege, but have little to say about light privilege. Don't want to come too close to home. We don't want to indict our own practices, our own moral hypocrisy, don't want to look into the looking glass. I'm not suggesting all of these things are created equal. They are not. Some bear the burden more powerfully than others. That is true. But at the same time, we've internalized much of that poison. That's why Beyonce knows Carter in her song Formation, a migration narrative. Daddy Alabama, Ma Louisiana. Then she says that I like my baby air with my baby hair, my Michael Jackson Negro nostrils. She is doing work simultaneously with the dominant white supremacist culture that rests upon the denial of the legitimate beauty and value of blackness, and also getting at black folk ourselves who are mindlessly aping the vicious repetition of stereotypes that hurt us from the beginning. Light, bright, and almost white, still seductive. Baby hair. Now, we might have to explain this to white brothers and sisters in the audience, how black people get that little hair on the edge right there and put the little grease on it, slick it down. People outside, excuse me, what is that? What odd follicular practices the Negroes possess. Yet when Gabby Douglas won the Olympics, black people talking about her hair on Twitter and social media. She done won a dadgum gold medal, but we are obsessed with the pedigree and the follicular fidelity of her roots. What is good hair? When you tell it to stay in place, it remains. So therefore, what the anthropologists call contour duplicated, or what Negroes call kinky, is good. This is what Beyonce is trying to do. Beyonce, the very woman who has been seen as the poster girl for a kind of light, bright, almost white superiority, is undermining and at least temporarily, or at least provisionally, deconstructing the entire enterprise. And then feminists who are denying her legitimacy as she continues to at least argue about feminism in a way that some feminists have not been successful in translating. I'm not trying to give a kind of unjust due to a kind of popularized, commercialized, fetishized conception of feminism, but dadgummit, at the end of the day, if Taylor Swift and Beyonce are at least engaging in schools of thought that look like, have elective affinities with traditional conceptions of feminism, that's a kind of progress that opens up the horizon of interpretation and begins to invite us to think critically about what it might mean to be a female working in a society where her work is not justly rewarded. And so Barack Obama stood on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington and gave one of the most depressing analyses about black people, suggesting basically that the civil rights movement had diverted, in some of its moments, the black liberation struggle had diverted the quest for freedom in America, that it had sidetracked the quest for racial justice. He blamed those folk. I sat there and heard him. Painful. The way in which he performed a kind of obligatory black critique that was not really insightful, mimicking and repeating what had been said by right-wing analysts and those who had not grappled with the complicated story of the evolution of the struggle for black freedom in America. And so, my brothers and sisters, it is difficult for black people to admit this. It's difficult for black people even to acknowledge it. Notice the level of hum that disappeared once the subject turned to Obama in a critical fashion. In here. Right? Black folk, don't mess with Bay. That's a black America's boo. Don't mess with boo. I understand that. But the problem is Boo and Bay has done some abusive stuff that would be called such were somebody else to commit it. But we get blinded like anybody else, our love and loyalty. And we should have love and loyalty for this extraordinary figure, but also heaping amounts of legitimate criticism that hold him accountable, even as he attempted to hold Black America accountable. He said, "I am not the president of Black America." As if we didn't know that. As if we were too ignorant to discern what the pulled lever and the dimpled Chad was for. As if we thought he were the president of the NAACP. You may not be the president of Black America, but you are the president of Black Americans. And therefore, sir, with all due respect, your job is to engage America at its best and to correct it at its worst. All presidents have had to deal with race, even if they tried to avoid it and circumspect it, circumnavigate it, circumscribe it, put it on the outskirts of their agendas. They have had to somehow confront it. We cannot excuse the first Black president from dealing with it because he has personal discomfort with not wanting to be blackened. Understandable, to be sure. And we know that Black people are loath to criticize Obama because the obstructionist, conservative, right-wing, reactionary Republican Party was dead set against him from the get-go. The very night of his inauguration in 2009, they were plotting and planning to undermine him. They were trying to figure out a way to make him unsuccessful, not help him govern, not put forth their competing ideology or political vision about what it might take to make this American nation an effective democracy. They trying to undermine this man. Called him all kind of names, spit all kind of venom at him. Politicians were writing emails. Police people were saying nasty things about him in Ferguson. Any wonder that Michael Brown died at the hands of a cop there? And so Obama was the victim of Black empathy because, like us, he was unfairly assaulted. The question is, why didn't his unfair assault make him more sympathetic to people who get assaulted as well? Despite the incredible love that Black people collectively have for him, 97% of the American Black population that voted for him the first time around, 93% the second time. When gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual and queer communities that include, of course, African American people among others, if we do our intersectional analysis correctly, I'm not juxtaposing these as competing oppositions that have nothing in common in concentric circles. I'm just saying, though, that as a community that gets recognized, politically speaking, LGBTQ communities are overwhelmingly non-people of color too, even though we got a lot of folk up in there. But their interests politically are articulated in a way that reinforces a certain variety of white privilege. And so the White House turned the White House the colors of the rainbow, when rightfully so, the Supreme Court supported gay marriage. Now, I happen to be a Black Baptist preacher for the last 35 some odd years who supports gay marriage too, supports gay people, supports lesbians, transgender, bisexual, queer people. I ain't never been to a Black church that turns down gay tithes. Right? They real selective with that now. Ain't nobody kicking them out the choir. Ain't gonna be no singing up in there. And very few are willing to kick them out the pulpit. They exist there too. Black people who are homophobic have been preached to by gay people. They just didn't know it. And then we get retroactively homophobic. My God, had I known you were gay, I would have never received that 4-year scholarship that got me through UMass Amherst and allowed me to be on my professional job now. And yet at the same time, Obama turned the White House the colors of the rainbow. I'm not expecting him to turn the White House red, black, and green until the last day. But what I'm saying, go out blazing, son, go out blazing. I wish Obama would come out with a terry cloth robe sometime, with a gold grill on, with them Magic Johnson socks, you know? What? It's what I do. It's what I represent like, right? I wish I could be his anger interpreter for real. Not this last time, but the time before when Obama stood before the nation to give his State of the Union address, when he announced that he had no more races to run and the Republicans got giddy. Obama nicely reinforced to them the notion that he had no more races to run because basically I whipped your ass already. Twice, and I don't know what else you want. And so this man, a symbolic representative of the quest of Black America to be free, even as he undermined through his own bully pulpitting and rhetoric the very virtues of those impulses and undercut them and precipitated the rise in part of Black Lives Matter by his hesitancy and his racial procrastination. While black bodies and brown bodies were being terrorized in the street, Obama remained silent for the most part until forced to speak after Trayvon Martin, because the lesson he learned after Skip Gates up the road here, when Professor Gates returned home from China and found his door jammed and had to jimmy it open with the help of a black driver looking as if they were breaking into a home, according to a passerby, so they called the police. Nice to have good neighbors. And then they got there, and Professor Gates, according to the arresting officer, James Crowley, talked about his mama. I knew that signifying monkey would have practical applications at some point. Just read up on that one. That ain't on Twitter. Signifying monkey, one of the greatest performances of literary critique in the last half century among African American people. And Professor Gates authored that, and part of that is to talk about the dozens and talking about folks' mama. And he's claimed that Gates talked about, do you know who I am? You done messed with the wrong black person, and talked about his mama. One can only hope that occurred. Professor Gates, of course, was in his own home, and when President Obama was asked a question at the end of a press conference that had nothing to do with the subject, mostly on the health care that was then being proposed, he said the cop was acting stupidly. He didn't say he was stupid. He said acting stupidly. Even smart people act stupid, I think. Ain't saying you stupid, saying you acting stupid. So he couldn't even get away with a kind of grammatical qualification. And then for 1 week, there was enormous outpour of controversy. And Obama learned the wrong lesson. That way lies tears, as the novelist of the 19th century said. So he didn't want to go that way. I ain't gonna talk no more about race, but wait a minute, bruh. They dog you when you talk about anything. After all, it is not that you point to the racial division, you are the racial division. Your black body is peripatetic peril, is walking contradiction, is a scourge to a white supremacist outlook that is fearful of the very possibility that unleashed blackness represents, even though he contains it with noble dignity and extraordinary discipline. My brothers and sisters, all of this contradiction rests in the presidency of this extraordinary man. Extraordinary because he saved the American economy, even when leftists were critical of him. What else was he going to do when he first got into the office as a black president? Let the banks fail? Forget first term, he might not have made it out of that week. He then went on, even with legitimate criticisms to be made. He helped distribute that TARP money. He helped put forth an antidote to this creeping depression that was at least a recession on steroids. He bailed out the automobile industry, even when Mitt Romney said, let it die. and yet is now thriving. And I'm from Detroit, so I got a little dog in that fight. What up, West Side, D, holla. And he gave us universal health care. Was it the ideal? Of course not. But given what could be done, he put forth a bill that got it done. And so Obama will undoubtedly go down as one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. But what he has done on race will not win him those plaudits. He is the Shaquille O'Neal of presidents. My man Shaquille just got into the Hall of Fame, a dominant center, one of the most gifted players of all time, and yet he couldn't shoot free throws. And when we do the history of Shaquille O'Neal, it does no good for us to lie and pretend Shaquille O'Neal could really shoot free throws. He couldn't. In fact, he was so bad that they invented the hack-a-shack. At the end of the game, put him on the line, deliberately foul him because he will make the rest of the team vulnerable when the game is on the line. Obama's free throw shooting is race and it's reality. He's a great and dominant president, but when it comes to race, he has been feckless and in many ways unimaginative, which is tragic. This man wrote one of the greatest memoirs on race and identity in the history of this nation. The beauty and rhythm, the power of the eloquence, the majesty of the sentences, the grammatical constructions that lent us the sensibility of a wizened and weary, but also insightful and enlightened storyteller. And yet he has been, for the most part, mute until he was forced to deal with it. And that's no problem. All presidents have been forced to do what they're supposed to do. No president really goes around looking for the opportunity to be challenged. They say so, but they never want it. And so that, in combination with black people's disinclination to be critical of the president, means that we had a tough situation. And those who were critical, I'm not talking about the haters. We know who they are. All the nasty stuff about Obama, jumping on him personally, saying vicious stuff about him, vituperation on steroids. We ain't talking about them. We're talking about legitimate, principled critique, those who love and appreciate who the president is, but who want to see him held accountable for the things he should do. The Black Presidency presents these paradoxes, these ironies, these contradictions, even as Obama has brilliantly engaged in the symbolic expression of blackness at the highest level. The signifying that goes on is superb with him. Obama, in fact, has been the greatest symbol of the progress of black America, and we in turn have been his proxies. Can't kill him, kill us. So black people on the street, brown people on the street, dark people on the street, victims of police brutality, because there is both slow and fast terror. Fast terror is bombs exploding. Fast terror is night riders through the night. Fast terror is the Ku Klux Klan and crosses being burned on lawns. Slow terror is expelling kids from school early without moral compunction or legal redress. Slow terror is living in societies that disrespect the fundamental premise of their humanity. Slow terror is going to schools where police more than counselors prevail. Slow terror is living in a society that is terrorized and pre-criminalized you. Dylan Roof couldn't kill Obama. He said, they are taking over. Dylan Roof, the young white man, the white supremacist who murdered those innocent souls at prayer in a church in Charleston. Who's taking over? Black folk ain't taking over. The president taking over. Black folk, for the most part, are not running Fortune 500 companies, are not dominant in American higher education. The only place we're dominant and what we're taking over is prison cells. So he has in mind unconsciously Obama as the symbol of our progress, and therefore we become vulnerable flesh proxies of a president who is guarded by the state, and our black bodies are left more vulnerable by that same state. When Beyonce said at the beginning of that song, Formation, stop killing us, stop shooting us, and the police go ham, for all those who thought that she was some Cupid doll Barbie, incapable of a critical and rational response, in a politicized fashion, misunderstand that the people who hate her ain't missed what she said. And what she said was simply, just don't kill us unfairly. If that offends you as police, then what is your particular role and job, and what is your particular insight about humanity of black and brown people? And are we to excuse ourselves for wanting to live and breathe without unfair, unjust encumbrance? I can't breathe as a metaphor for the space that is occupied by the poison of Flint, an obnoxious, toxic environment that refuses to celebrate the very diversity upon which this nation rests. And so Barack Obama, that beautiful black man, that brilliant political figure, that complicated man, represents for so many a threat. And if you don't dig Barack Obama, ain't a black person been made you're gonna really dig. He's as nice as they come. Yes, we can. He don't get upset. But part of his sin is his swaggerliciousness. Just the way he be walking down Air Force One. Something about that. Even though he has some sometimes corrupt, sometimes centrist, sometimes problematic conceptions of black identity and its relationship to an ideological framework that mutes the specificity of our humanity, it is overcome at the same time, or at least suspended by the bounce. Y'all have seen that YouTube when Obama goes to visit with Kevin Durant, the great basketball player. He speaks to the white coach. Hi, how are you? Fine, how are you? Next guy, hey, how are you? Fine, good. Sees Kevin Durant, what's up, bruh? Right? Little notches of signification, niches of powerful, radiating and radiant blackness, unapologetically existing in its intensity and blessing the world for it. And Obama attaches to that too. Obama excavates that too. Obama radiates that too. There's something about not only that swag, but that intelligence. Something about the verbal ability, though we know his verbal ability for measured against politicians is A+. Within black preaching traditions, about a C+. Because the average Negro preacher with 12 members on the corner is going to out-preach most American orators. You've seen them. 12 folk in the church. Today I want to talk about God is love. I don't want to talk about God. I don't want to talk about love. I want to talk about is. I've seen it. I tell you, I've seen it. Is you got good religion? Is your all on the altar of sacrifice laid? I heard a black preacher preaching during that homiletical extravaganza called Good Friday in black communities, where 7 preachers take at the last 7 words of Jesus, and his word was, "It is finished." And he said, "Look at it." I, representing the ego of Jesus as a man, and the T representing the Christic consciousness of the universe. That Negro deconstructed it. As a neo-Freudian, Einsteinian, time-warped intensity. And so Obama taps into that, the fluid and fluent ability to talk black and talk American simultaneously. His code switching is exemplary. His ability to understand and discern the heart of America and its goals and aspirations at his best is remarkable. So when he stood at Selma and gave one of the most remarkable orations of his presidency, where he identified, stopped scolding black people and represented them, didn't remonstrate morally against them, but understood the value of what they had struggled for. And then when he stood in Charleston, when the nation had finally to grapple for a moment with this vicious symbolism of the Confederacy. And all of this discourse about heritage versus hate, as if they are essentially contradictory, as if they can't be simultaneous, as if somebody's heritage can't be hate. This morning I was in Carolina, where they have put forth the legislation, the HB2 bill. It looks like it's about bathrooms, but it really ain't. People who are nervous. It always amazes me about Americans who are nervous about gay and lesbian and transgender, bisexual, queer people. Are you scared? What, you think is going to rub off on you? Or maybe you might like it more than you want to. Holla. Call me. Senators who are conservative in the Midwest, who go into bathrooms after remonstrating against gay people and thinking about American family values and touch the toes of their neighbor under the stall. Is there any more eloquent testimony to the fact it ain't a choice? It's who you are, deeply rooted. People say it's a choice. When did you choose to be straight? Did you get up at 12 and tell your mother, you know, I have looked at the competing interests of the available erotic choices, and I've selected straight? No more eloquent declamation for the unavoidability of the internal impulse that constitutes who we are at the root of our humanity. So Obama stood there. And I talk about that Carolina bill that's supposed to be about bathrooms, but really is about the same thing. It's about the way in which wages can't be raised. It's about the suppression of the black and elderly vote. It's about the inability to acknowledge the humanity of people in a particular state. It's about using religion as a cover for bigotry and using God to co-sign your hate. And so Obama stood there, tall and proud. This was not the time to excoriate, but to celebrate. To acknowledge the difficulty of who we are as a people, as a nation, but also to unapologetically think about the incredible humanity of black folk, forgiving somebody who ain't even asked for it. And black folk be asking questions. We don't just ask, we ask. I think there's something quite precise about that pronunciation. Like an axe, we cut to the heart of the matter. Our questions are searching. Let me ask you a question. And on that day, with the full regalia of the state and the pageantry of its legitimation standing on either side of him, and with the beauty and the power of black religion behind him, with the royal sea of purple of those bishops, any one of whom could outpreach anything in America. Vashti McKenzie, the first woman among the African Methodist Episcopal priesthood and bishopric, one of the greatest preachers in America today. All standing there to celebrate with Obama as he called out the names and started tuning up. Now, if you ain't in the black church, you might not know what tuning up is. Striated diction and coarsened syllables that are slung across melismatically a stanza or two while there's a hum involved. You don't have me, oh Lord. If I had somebody to help me up in here, and like y'all had been to church and know what I'm talking about. Oh Lord. Obama started tuning a little bit, talking about who had received grace. He named them each by name, and then he had the unabashed temerity and the gall to sing a song. A little bit off key, but that's all right. That was the blues moment of the black experience writ large against the canvas of our spoiled and spectacular history. Obama sang an Amazing Grace, the song, as Professor Sinha reminds us at the close of her magisterial tome, that this song written by an ex-slaver repenting for his own sin. The irony that Obama would take one of theirs and hook it up to defend one of ours. That is the beauty of what he has done. That is the simple, dignified expression of a black register of intelligence and spirituality that is indeed rescued and at some points redeemed this nation. This is the complexity of what Obama represents. This is the power and the symbolism of this singular and extraordinary man. We are thankful in many ways to have seen the day arrive in America where a black man might become president. The price of it, however, has been steep. The constraints imposed, dramatic. Some of his rhetoric, draconian. And yet, rising above that is the simple and eloquent truth that he has forever marked the American presidency. It will never be the same again. He has darkened the corridors of history and made a White House a little less so. That still, in our day and age, is remarkable. Thank you so very kindly. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Dyson. My name is Alvin Baenza. I'm a neuroscience and English literature major. I'm a freshman at UMass Amherst. One question I want to ask you about your lecture is that early on you had said that President Obama's presidency had caused like a renaissance of racism in America, and that the Black Lives Matter movement was in part like a response to this renaissance of new racism. Mm-hmm. Would you say that maybe that the Black Lives Matter movement is actually more aware now of the ongoing racism? Because I would think that racism has always been prevalent in America. It's just that nowadays we are more aware of it, and we are more aware of the things of white privilege and systemic racism, and how that is crippling the African American community.
Yeah, very, very, very sharp, very insightful. And yes, I think so. I think you said more eloquently and on point what I was trying to get at. But I was also trying to suggest that, that the Black Lives Matter was echoing an ancient call for the respect of black humanity and the integrity of black identity. And you're absolutely right, though. It happens in cycles. The recognition and refusal to engage, accept, comply with the various moral and ethical demands of blackness. And yet it happens even simultaneously. It's not serial. One thing is true and then another thing comes along to dethrone that. It happens simultaneously. Stuff happens at the same time. And I think that, that Obama's very presence elicited and evoked such consternation among so many constituencies that were used to having their way. and having their say and having their country the way they wanted it. And whatever legitimate criticisms we may launch against Barack Obama, his very presence opened up space for those who are critical of what he did with his blackness to express it even more explicitly. I mean, we're all riding Obama's, if you will, rise into power, even if we're critical of that rise, and even if we are rightfully skeptical about some of his consequences. In terms of Black Lives Matter, yes, of course. I mean, look, Black Lives Matter, for the most part, are millennials and young people, highly intelligent, significantly lettered, and people who are struggling with what it means to be black in an era of a black president, and yet ironically and paradoxically perhaps even more, that there's been this renaissance, this rise, this resurgence of racial animus toward black people. And so partly, I didn't even speak of it in the lecture, there's so much room to cover, but this post-racial nirvana that we're supposed to have gotten into just didn't pan out to be so. And I think Black Lives Matter brilliantly does two things. First of all, it reinforces the need to deal with structural and systemic issues, but it also looks at racial animus, the hostility toward blackness in particular, or brown identity in particular, that even when the law is changed and the laws are on the books, the way in which some people look at you, think about you, reflect on you, has to at least be grappled with. Now, Robin Kelly, writing brilliantly in Boston Review recently, talked about the need for Black Lives Matter to engage in some serious critique and some serious study, as all social movements must. But I applaud Black Lives Matter for helping us understand just how treacherous this particular racial epoch is, this era of Obama, ironically, paradoxically, suffused with all this nastiness, this viciousness, and this hate, and forcing us to come to grips with it. It would have been interesting to see Black Lives Matter challenge Obama, right? You know, challenging Hillary and Bernie is one thing, the white folk, right? It would have been interesting to see them challenge the black man occupying that office. Part of it is you can't bribe the birth order. It came along when it came along. Obama's presence is the very thing that elicited Black Lives Matter in response to the racist imperialism that was resurgent. So in that sense, it's arguing in a circle and begging the question, without Obama, would it have been manifest in the same way? Donald Trump is a consequence, however, of the racial hesitation of Obama. I'm not blaming Obama for Donald Trump. Who could do that? But race will be spoken about. Either you're going to get ahead of the curve, and speak on it, or if you leave a vacuum, homie gonna talk. And he doing it's even beyond Donald Trump, it's just pan hate. It's such a xenophobia toward others, you know, who are foreign. It's hatred of Muslims and Mexicans, and I don't think it's the Dominicans or the Mexicans or the Puerto Ricans. I think it's the Republicans who are messing up a lot of stuff on the far right that dismisses the legitimacy. So I think Black Lives Matter has been incredibly important to, yes, reminding us of the fact that this stuff is resurgent, that it has come about again. And I think that it's a give and take. And as Black Lives Matter itself becomes more sophisticated and more informed and more, I think, in touch with earlier traditions of similar expressions of moral outrage and strategic intervention in behalf of a black freedom struggle, the stronger it becomes. I hope I answered. If I didn't answer your point, you know, did I answer that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool.
Tyson.
All right. Good deal. Thank you. Over here? Okay, yes.
Hi, so I was wondering, with 9 months left in his presidency, if you could sit down and personally ask, or if you have a personal hope for the president to do any 1, 2, 3, 8,000 things to try to better continue the discussion on race in this country, what would they be? And also, do you see him the president perhaps taking a more central role on race relations in America following his presidency and perhaps becoming almost a rallying figure on maybe opening up a better dialogue and a less, less combative that we've seen over the last 8 years of his presidency dialogue on race?
Yes, sir. Those are great questions as well. Well, when I had the chance to talk to him, let me just, I did sit down several times and talk with him. I did express quite honestly, not viciously, not negatively, but quite vigorously, my disagreement with Obama's belief in strategic inadvertence. Right? Don't do it directly, do it indirectly. Right? Wish he would have practiced that when it came time to excoriating black people. There wasn't no signal, that was real literal. So Obama's racial discourse is characterized by strategic inadvertence. I don't intend for this particular policy to address an issue of race, but by its presence in the broader mainstream, it will inevitably help those. So strategic inadvertence is one. The heroic explicit is another, where he was very particular about criticizing black people and seen as heroic for doing so. And then thirdly, the noble implicit. He ain't really told white folk how messed up they are. He told black folk on the regular how messed up they are. And isn't it interesting? We're very interesting in this country. We say he's half black and half white. Well, if that's the case, why can't he criticize white as much as black? Because that ain't real. Because he's perceived as a black man even though he's biracial. That's why he put on his stuff. And when he hooked up his birth certificate and had them say he was born in Hawaii, that was a joke, y'all. That was a joke. Maybe the birthers are here. My God, it's a joke. Get it? Get it? I'm just joking. Obama has consistently said he's a black man, right? Even if you're biracial. This is not to deny the legitimacy of biracial identities and many biracial students who feel marginalized in a culture that forces us to choose one or the other. If you are all of that, be all of that. The way in Tiger Woods, his mama tied him up and his daddy blacked him up. Tie and black. I don't know if y'all slow on the jokes or I thought Amherst was ahead of that, but you're not appreciating the jokes up here. And so, in that sense, however, Obama was circumscribed and constrained in his office of being celebrated for heroically being explicit about his disgruntlement with blackness, but very implicit and never specific about challenging whiteness as whiteness. Now, when those three principles operate, strategic inadvertence, heroic explicit, noble implicit, it makes it real tough for Obama to address the issues that I think are important. So I said to him, sir, directly, I think that a rising tide lifts all boats doesn't work. I said, I think you've got it wrong. The civil rights movement helped because it was specific. The civil rights bill passed, and it helped every other minority in America. Every other minority now appeals to the civil rights bill because that's by hooking black folk up, you hook the nation up. And he thought if you hook the nation up, you hook black folk up. No, if that's the case, it would have already worked because we already had universalism. We hold these truths to be self-evident that but all didn't even include us. So we know universality never works because universal is always somebody else's particular rendered universal. White particularity dressed up as, in costume as, the universal in drag. I'm saving my good stuff for later. We're going to go to dinner. I'm going to share, y'all, that's all right. That's all right. That's all right. If I was up here spitting some future, you'd be good with me. So, maybe. Maybe not. So, I said, if you go to the emergency ward, I literally said this to him. I said, if you go to the emergency ward, sir, you don't get medicine. If you got a hangnail, you get aspirin. If you got cancer, you get chemotherapy. If you've got diabetes, you get insulin. There's no such thing as universal medicine for everybody. Medicines, like public policies, work best when they target the ills they're meant to relieve. And I did say that to him. He disagreed. He thought the universal worked. So I shared with him my beliefs, and I think it was just a philosophical conflict there. The first thing I think he's already done, stop dogging black people in public. It helps, right? A lot of black people can't admit it. We going, you know, same ones think OJ is innocent. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? Thought I was saying that to myself. I thought Bill Cosby was doing the right thing. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? I thought I was saying it to myself. So a serial rapist as comedian who was allegedly serial rapist, let me say that. I know it's Amherst roots up here. Oh yeah, y'all produced that too. Degreed and credentialed. Here. To repent in the name of Jesus. So, I'm just serious. I'm sorry. So a comedian, one of the great geniuses in the American comedic mindset, Samuel Clemens, Richard Pryor, Lenny Bruce, George Carlin, Bill Cosby, just stunning, right? And yet, he went around the country beating up on people. We black people found it hard to criticize him. Then when he's accused mostly and largely of allegedly raping white women, it becomes a moral disaster. It was a moral disaster when he was attacking black people. And we were the ones who were drugged. Man, if I was in church, boy. We got drugged because we didn't want to believe. And so for me, the first thing is to stop dogging black people. Secondly, though, is to try some of those executive orders on behalf of black folk. I mean, can you hook us up too? I mean, you got all these executive, hey, give us one. What did we get? My brother's keeper? Stop. I love my brother's keeper, but I'm saying, are you the head of a foundation? Are you like Darrell Walker? Are you at the Ford Foundation? Because my brother's keeper is something they could be doing. How you gonna be the president and you doing foundation work? You can do politics. Go to Israel and Palestine and say, I want to give you my brother's keeper. Try that one out. See how that looks. Right? Give us public policy. We need public policy. The unemployment rate was double. It always is. We can't blame Obama. Every president has tried to grapple with that. But other presidents at least tried to directly deal with that issue. He couldn't even acknowledge it. Strategic inadvertence doesn't allow black unemployment to even exist as a category that needs to be addressed. So public policies and executive orders would be helpful. He's done some of this stuff in terms of criminal justice, an executive order that young people will not be put in solitary and that kind of thing. And the White House says that more than last seven presidents, we've done more pardons. That's very specific. Read the fine print. That's for nonviolent drug offenses. All right, cool, but not the other stuff. And the other stuff is where we getting jacked up too. Even there, the politics of respectability intervenes. The appropriate kind of criminal who needs to be redeemed, right? And so Obama has been extremely stingy when it comes to pardoning folk, right? And then, thirdly, could you have put forth a black woman for the Supreme Court? Now, let me tell you what I mean, but now I don't want you to think, oh my God, you need everything Jiminy Cricket. This is what I mean. Obama had 3 chances. He put forth 2 women. It's beautiful. But here's the point. You sound like the average corporate white person, often white men, we just can't find one. We looked. The first questioner is neuroscience. Hey, we couldn't find any blacks in neuroscience. So what Obama does is reinforce. He said the other day at the University of Chicago, hey, it's not like I went to Skokie looking for a black lesbian. What? If a white man had said that, we would have been bananas. We would have gone ham for those who engage in pork. Oh, got that one, huh? Okay, that's it. Little Kanye for you. So, had a white man said, I didn't go looking for the Negro that graduated from Harvard. He said, I didn't go to Skokie, where Garland is from, looking for, give me a black lesbian. Maybe you should have number one. But number two, now are you bewitched by that notion of merit? That meritocracy prevails and that meritocracy means best and best means white man? Why is it always when I found the best, it happens to be a white man? No disrespect to white men. Some of the best and smartest people I know are white men. Some of them. A lot of them are mediocre. I teach them at school. I mean, dude, what happened to that mythology of superiority? Guess you missed the one on that one. Now, I ain't dogging. Look, my students are all smart. White men, white women, black men, all my students are smart. But I'm saying, let's demythologize this notion that merit is connected to whiteness as the implicit or as the default position of quality and qualification. So Obama goes, sorry, I was just looking for the best. Damn! Where are the black women to call him out on that? If we go by that, hold on. If we go by that litmus test that Obama adduced and devoked for the Supreme Court, he'd have never been president. You were a one-term senator, dude. You ain't had no experience. You were so green, you put you in the ground, you would grow. And I knew that. That's why I was voting him, supporting him, surrogate for him twice. Because I'm trying to deconstruct and demythologize this conception, this staid, narrow, sterile conception of merit. And yet, he gets in the office and reinforces it. And had it been used against him, he'd have never beat Hillary Clinton, who then, as now, is more qualified than every man in the race. Thank you. For those three women over here, most of whom who are African American. Hillary ain't got no problem. Where you at, Bernie? So what's interesting, oh boy, y'all missing everything. That's all right, yes. What's the hell? Must be too early. So for me, if Obama could not brag about all the black people he's put on the bench at the lower level, but could take a risk on black people at the highest level to show America that one can be black and female and lesbian and gay and qualified at the same time, that would be great. But since he ain't gonna do that, let me give the final one. The final one would be that as he is on his way out, that he could lead the nation in a much more honest conversation about the issue of race. Now, Bill Clinton did the conversation on race. Now, we know it's not popular to even point to Bill Clinton right now. Let me tell you, Black Lives Matter. Those black people wanted that damn bill too. You saw the op-ed in the New York Times. They said, not so fast. It was more complicated than that. Right? As it always is with Bill Clinton. I mean, Bill Clinton is a genius and a scoundrel, right? A genius scoundrel, right? He goes to black churches. He knew the hymns and the hymn lines. What's up with y'all, man? What's up with y'all? Thank you. Call me. I feel your pain. Can you feel mine? Ooh. So it's not popular to talk about Bill Clinton right now, but Bill Clinton is a complicated guy. And so when I think about, Bill Clinton, of course, and his complicated odyssey as president, when I think about Barack Obama, and Clinton at least led us on a conversation to think seriously about it. John Hope Franklin as the head of that commission, and you say, well, not much came out. But the fact that the President of the United States of America set that tone is so important. If Obama could use his bully pulpit finally to just use, he defended Black Lives Matter in a very serious way. And he's talked about criminal justice reform. If he could even help white America understand what white privilege is. A lot of white Americans don't, I ain't got no privilege. What, I'm poorer than you are, black people? And then if you can help white people say, here's the greatest white privilege you can have. You walking down the street and a policeman stops you and you reach for your wallet and that policeman doesn't assume it's a gun and kill you. You ain't got to be rich to be a beneficiary of white privilege. Now, it's hard to talk about privilege of anybody. You notice when we talk about black people and homophobia, we get real tight because we're using the Bible in the same way that white supremacists used it against black people to use it against gay people. So it's black people ought to cut some white supremacists a slack because it's hard to change your mind. And to think God gave you, I talk to people all the time, the Lord, that's different, that race thing versus that gay thing. Right? Ain't what? So the thing is, if Obama could actually lead a conversation, have a couple of speeches at the end that says, as I leave office, this is what I see. And sir, I hope that that in his post-presidency, he's able to do it. But that's just like Michael Jordan saying he was going to talk about race when he retired from basketball. Ain't nobody going to give a damn, dude. Right? Mostly. They're concerned about, right? He never did, right? And by the way, Kobe is playing his last game tonight, the greatest basketball player of all time. So thank you. Over there, your book is signed first, whoever did the whelp, right? Yes. I know you haters out there don't understand how great Kobe is. Sorry. There was an essay published today in, what's the name of it? Slam magazine. I want you to go read it. Of course, I wrote it, but anyway. Those are trifling things. I mean, But so the thing is, if we could get Obama to lead a conversation about that, it would be important. But when he leaves office, he will be a galvanizing figure for the good. But unfortunately, you're not going to be the president. He will forever be a superstar in America. And I think, like Ronald Reagan, 20 years from now, he's going to be nearly untouchable in the collective imagination of America. And I hope he uses that for good, and I hope we can push him. But he's basically a centrist Democrat who's an incrementalist and doesn't want to challenge these things too much. I don't know how helpful that might be. It will be helpful in maintaining a veneer of civility and the necessary building blocks of engaging one's opponent without demonizing them. That's important, though. David Brooks wrote in the New York Times, we miss Obama already. That's the right wing talking to you. Because when you got Ted Cruz, I don't want to be partisan here. Yeah. But if you get a car, don't put it in cruise control. Oh, got that one, I see. Okay. And I know people like to play cards, but don't be Trump tight. I gave up eating Kentucky Fried Chicken with Colonel Sanders a long time ago. So I think he will play a very vital and important role in trying to engage these ideas.
Great, thank you very much.
It's time to go. We have a book signing. 4 people are left. We're going to sell those 4 people these books.
Can I just ask one quick question?
Mm-hmm.
So, Deborah, again, thank you so much for your lecture. It was just wonderful. But in terms of what you were talking about, in terms of Black Lives Matter, actually, my son, who's a 6th grader, African-American, and 3 other classmates in his class wrote a letter to Barack Obama on the Black Lives Matter issue. And they're actually calling it a state of emergency and are asking to talk to him about this issue.
How long ago did they write the letter?
They just wrote it. It's gone viral. It's been shared, thousands of times now on the internet. They've been interviewed and so on and so forth. But I'm not talking about that because for them, as 6th graders, as 12-year-old black kids, I mean, it's dangerous for our black kids out there, right?
Yes.
So they chose to write about this and to write to Obama because they need him to be a leader, to really safeguard their safety because they don't see, and they break down in the letter data, in terms of, the fact that they're either black men are in prison or being killed.
Right.
And black women and LGBTQ, anyone that is in the other portion. So they're really calling and saying it's a state of emergency. You need to do something. And they're looking to him as a role model, as a black man to stand up. I mean, they haven't received a response. They've sent the letter, and they've gone viral. But it's really something in terms of their safety, and they're asking that question.
I think that Obama is more likely to answer a viral video of a girl crying when she discovers he's no longer going to be president Right? So that's symbolic, loosey-goosey, emotional,
Yeah.
versus substantive, hard politics, like your sixth grader.
Exactly.
is
12-year-old.
12-year-old putting forth rain and crop. I mean, in doing a serious analysis and begging, again, for an explicit, right? Strategic inadvertence, heroic explicit. He can only be explicit about black people when it's negative, very rarely when it's positive. And the noble implicit. So at that level, I just think that Obama's not going to touch, I would love to be proved wrong. I would love to be proved wrong. But to acknowledge that at that level would means he would have to be a different kind of person, to reorient himself toward thinking about these issues in ways that he can help the broader American public. Now, he's done so to a certain degree with certain issues within Black Lives Matter by inviting them to the White House and then speaking about them before a gathering of police chiefs in America. So I think he's done a great job in that regard. But on the regular, in terms of the routine, that's not the kind of response that's not the kind of expression that will warrant a response from Obama. But I would hope and pray I'm wrong, and I would love to see him, just to spite me, answer those young people and people like me who are critical of him. I would love to do that. In fact, I'm going to try to send a copy to Valerie Jarrett and see what happens.
Yeah, because they're holding
How
out
about
hope.
that?
They're holding out hope. They want to talk
But
to
me recommending it is a death knell right now. But I will, certainly, I mean, it's an incredible thing. And I've been studying Kobe so much, I'm missing what's really going on in life here. Yeah. So I need to take a look at that myself. And thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you. So we just tell them? All right. They're just coming. We got to take it for you. All right.